Hello, hello.
Hi, Devin. I'm Charlene. I'm one of the professors, one of the journalism teachers.
Cool. Good to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Welcome. Wow, we're
Yeah.
honored to have you today.
This will be fun. I made a presentation and it's kind of unique. I don't know how it's gonna go, but I think it'll be more fun than other presentations I've made. So
Nice. Is this
uh,
like your garage?
this is my garage.
I
Yeah.
love it. That is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk a little bit about, what it's like to have been working on a show like The Bay during the pandemic and putting it together too, if people are interested. But yeah, I've been working out of here for most of the pandemic at this point.
Wow, that's been your office then.
Yeah, actually, I've had I would say about six different offices. I started upstairs, and once we had our first kid, it became really crowded up there. So eventually, I got moved down here.
Oh, nice. So I invited my two mass comm classes to join. So this is going to be an extra credit thing for them.
Cool.
And I'm glad that it's recorded. I heard the recording thing because whoever can send me the link so I can give it to my students
Sounds good.
to watch it. But so how many kids do you have?
I just won my first one. She's a year and a half, 17
Oh,
almost. Yeah.
so sweet.
Yeah, she is sweet.
Is she running around like
She's running around. Yeah, she's running around and she's talking and doing all the fun things. Sleeping through the night too, which is pretty good. Like we're pretty happy about that. So
Nice.
yeah, things are
Yeah,
okay.
mine is 30 years old.
Nice. Yeah.
And I now have two grandkids. One is a year and a half and the other is 3 years old.
Nice. Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad to be doing this, and I hope KQED can keep a relationship with DVC and your department going, because we had a couple people apply to the internships last semester, but we'd love to keep that happening. And like, I hope this is helpful to people who are thinking about possibilities and just all the possibilities about getting into audio too. So yeah, I'd love to continue doing these
How did this
various ways.
connection start?
It started because one of my goals in this position, which is brand new at KQED, is to really reach out to more under relationshiped colleges and schools between KQED and X, because we've been having a relationship with UC Berkeley for a long time. And one of the things that is my goal is to expand to all schools to get more people to apply. So it's not just people from UC Berkeley getting into our internships. And so I reached out to, I think, Michael, because I think his name was on some, page on the internship program or the journalism program. And then we just started talking about, hey, here's some internships we have. And he's like, cool, I'll share it with my kids. And then I was like, if you ever want me to come talk or whatever, and then he's like, let's set something up.
Yeah.
So here we are.
How many internships do you have available each year at KQED?
There's 6-month internships and we have roughly like 12.
Wow.
It's gonna fluctuate a little bit. I'll share the opportunities that exist right now, but it's gonna, even next semester, it's going to shift. So we might not have some of the internships we have right now.
Okay.
It's kind of up to us to move around internships. Sometimes some are better remotely. Other times we want to move more into podcasts. So we're going to take some from radio and put it into podcasts. So there is some shifting that's constantly going on.
That's great. That's good. I didn't realize there was that many though. I mean,
yeah.
12 and then 6 months. So it's not like, full year commitment. It's, that's awesome.
Exactly.
Yay.
Cool. Are you actually leading this? Okay, because I wanted to check.
I can.
Michael is jump on. Okay.
Michael's the one that created it. I actually made the flyer for this. Cool. And then he sent out a reminder to everybody, and I created an assignment on my Canvas for my students to do this extra credit. And I told him it's not mandatory, it's not required, but if you want some extra points, why not?
Nice. Very good. That works.
Yeah, so he should probably be here any minute. Yeah, usually I'm the one that's struggling. There he is. Oh no, that's maybe a student. But usually I'm the one that's struggling with Wi-Fi and texting and going, I'm trying to get in right now. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I just want to make sure my audio works. So maybe I'll try. Actually, can I just try to do something right now?
I should do my pronouns.
Host disabled participants. Okay. Yeah, we'll wait. We will wait.
So how long have you, I know you'll probably already say this, but how long have you been with KQED?
Since 2015.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
quite a while. Did you start, how did you start, as an intern or just right in?
Actually was an intern in 2011, but then I actually got my first job in Louisville, Kentucky, which you'll hear all about. And it's part of, yeah, it was definitely part of my journey. I basically applied to a lot of places, which again is something I'll talk about. And Louisville was the place where I got my first job, which if you have the means, I would highly recommend. And I say you being like, if you're just getting into journalism, if you have the means, I would highly recommend expanding your search beyond just the Bay Area, because the opportunities here are very limited, but they're open a lot of other places. So I do encourage that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm asking you all the things that's going to be in your presentation. I'm a journalist myself, so I've been writing for newspapers and magazines forever. And so I just finished an interview with a jazz singer, Natalie Douglas. She's in New York, and she's going to be performing in the Orinda Theater in April. Yeah, nice. So I kind of always stay in this journalism mode, like, questions.
Yeah, I hear you.
So I think Marina, she's probably a student. So hi, Marina. Which class are you in?
Sorry, I'm in the library, but I'm in intro.
Yell it out. Yell it out.
I'm in intro.
Someone can just shush you.
I'm in intro to news writing and reporting.
Nice, nice. So that's Michael's class. Awesome. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
So it's nice, Devin, that you're taking time out of your schedule. I'm sure you're super busy.
I am, but honestly, I feel like this is a big part of my job, or at least part of like what I want to be part of this job. I kind of get to create my job to some degree, because it's brand new and they really needed somebody to put forward their vision at the beginning in the job interview. And so part of my vision was doing exactly stuff like this. So in my opinion, I could stay here all day and this is what I'm doing. So I'm happy to be here for sure.
Nice. Nice.
Hey, Michael.
Devin, hi there.
I just tried sharing my screen. I think the options are off right now.
Oh, tell me how I need.
I have to give them permission.
It just says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't know exactly how you have to.
Wait a second. Let me get. Oh, one participant can share multiple participants. Here we go. How about now? How do you do it? How are you doing, Devin, with that?
Yeah, that works. Well, can I just test something?
Test it, please do. That's great. Looks like you're good.
Let's see. Let's go to my first piece of audio. Here it is.
Great.
Actually, I'll just.
All right.
So, can you hear that one?
Headline.
Sounded like rustling papers.
Cool. Then we're good to go. I'll stop sharing for now.
Very good. That looks like you are literally, not just figuratively, but literally in a garage, if that's a real car behind you.
That's what I said.
This is my garage. And
it's a cool background.
Car's slowly been moving more and more this way. So it's been funny to watch just in my rearview mirror. I used to have 2 orange chairs on either side of me, but we had to put our second car in here. So we have actually a really long garage. I live in Vallejo. And so both of our cars are just in the garage right now.
Nice.
So it's nice to have a garage, but it's also getting a little crowded in here.
Right. No kidding. Looks like it.
That's what garages are for.
Yeah.
To accumulate.
Right.
I don't know exactly how long this presentation is going to be, but I want to end by 1:20 is my goal, maybe-ish, just to have, I think questions will be.
Feel free to wrap up, and feel free to wrap up sooner too, and leave more time if you feel like after a half hour, 45, whatever you're feeling. We don't need to run it the full length, as long as people are asking questions. That'd be great. But you
good
go at your pace.
Cool.
All right, people are dialing in. Nice to see you here, Marina, and other folks from class. Hi, Andrea. All right, we'll give folks just a couple more minutes so we get your max participation here.
One moment, I'm gonna grab some water.
Yeah, let's give folks just 1 or 2 minutes to get on here. I'll be right back as well. Done.
Hi, Itzel.
Hi.
How are you doing? Thanks for
Good.
joining.
Good. How are you?
Doing good. Except for the toe, the fractured toe. It's still in a, here's a Wendy Williams shoe cam. Yay.
Oh my God. I hope you feel better.
How'd you
Yeah.
do that? Oh no.
Oh yeah. So I just, hi, Andrea, how you doing? And by the way, Andrea Madison is one of our writers for the Orinda News. I'm so excited. She is a DVC, and you're the editor again, right?
Yes. Yep.
The Inquirer at the at DVC. And anyway, yeah, no, I was coming down the hallway and just, didn't negotiate my turn very well, and my toe just met the vintage table leg. Yeah, so I fractured the toe, and everyone, I post on Facebook and stuff, and everyone's asking me how the table is doing.
Oh.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Oh, man.
My table's fine.
Table's fine. Toes are so hard to heal too, because you kind of gotta just pack in the whole foot and wait for it to heal,
Yeah, they tape it to another toe, and you're supposed to keep it immobilized, for 4 to 6 weeks. So I've got 3 to 5 left. Yeah.
Well, I hope it isn't hurting you or anything.
No, I've only used pain meds twice, an hour after it happened, and then later, I think it was the next day. And that's been it so far. I've been trying to stay away from any pain meds. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Why don't we just get started? People can trickle in as they need to. This is it saying that it's recording? Yes, it is being recorded. I'll be posting this to class. Hello, everyone, in several classes, and Charlene bringing some students from the other realm in journalism at DVC.
Mass communication.
Welcome all. This is the first lecture. I don't think we've actually done a formal journalism speaker series, but this is the inaugural one of 2022. Absolutely. And Devin Katayama is our honored guest, local Bay Area journalist. I'm going to keep this really brief and give him only the most sort of basic introduction to which essentially will frame what he's going to talk about today. But just to let you know that Devin is KQED's editor of talent and development. You might wonder what that kind of means and refers to. I'm sure he's going to talk about it, but I know one thing it means, which is that he looks to, he tries to create more equitable opportunities to improve the KQED newsroom. And one way of doing that is looking for students like at DVC and colleges across the area who are studying journalism, looking to get internships, looking to get your foot in the door as an initial job in whatever capacity at a place like KQED. So Devin has his finger on that pulse. He formerly hosted the Bay and American Suburb podcast from KQED News. And before he returned to the Bay Area in 2015, Devin was the education reporter for WFPL in Louisville, Kentucky. He worked as a producer with stations in Chicago and in Portland, Oregon. And his work has appeared on major NPR shows that many of us are familiar with: Morning Edition, All Things Considered, The Takeaway, Here and Now. I used to turn on KQED quite regularly and hear Devin on air, and it's great to have him with us here. Devin also earned his master's degree in journalism from Columbia College in Chicago, where he was a Follett Fellow. He was also the 2011 Studs Terkel Community Media Workshop Scholarship Award winner, which he got for, it was a scholarship, not an award, for his reporting on Chicago homeless youth. And he did win several other prestigious awards like WBUR, the Daniel Shore Award, and a regional Edward Murrow Award, very prestigious, for a documentary, At Risk, that looked at issues facing some of Louisville's students. So, and he's won other awards from the AP, Society of Professional Journalists. And essentially the takeaway is that Devin is really an on-the-ground reporter covering the issues that are vital to communities, issues of human, social, economic, local, political importance. And he's been doing it a long time. So let's hear what you have to tell us, Devin, about your work at KQED and bringing everyone sort of into why they should be interested and care about what is going on at our local, public radio broadcaster here in the Bay Area. Thank you.
I am going to share my screen and I'm going to present. Well, thank you, everybody. What am I doing? What is this? That's not how I do it. Hold on 1 second. I guess just start the slideshow. Okay. So this is like a brand new presentation that I put together based on what I think might be most interesting and most helpful. So I'm going to go over several things, but the title of this is The News We Make and the People Who Make It. And really, I'm going to talk a little bit about my own journey into public media, because I think it is telling in terms of things that you could do yourself right now, and then also a glimpse into the possible pathway into public media, or just things that you maybe should or would want to know early on in your career, stuff that I didn't know early in my career. I'm the editor of talent and development at KQED. Half my job is working with the interns and on-call staff, people who kind of do backfill, maybe sometimes last minute, sometimes they know it's like going to be 3 days a week for a little bit. But people who are kind of trying to get either their foot in public media or their foot in the door at KQED, I'm there to tell them about the opportunities and work one-on-one and mentor in some cases, which I love. And then the other half of my job is the systemic, fixing a lot of the systemic problems that are prevalent in a lot of newsrooms. I would say every single newsroom, and certainly at KQED. And I'll go into some of that because I think it's very relevant to where the future of journalism is heading. But just a little bit about myself. I got into public media and journalism, which I should say I've spent my entire career in journalism in public media, because as you'll see, audio is the thing that I really love most, more than journalism. But the way I got into it was at about 27 years old, and I'll tell you a little bit about that path. But before that, I just want to say that you're already likely thinking about this earlier on and maybe have some ideas about what you want to do. I didn't out of college. I went to college in New York City. And when I was done, I really knew that I wanted to try things out. So I worked at a law firm for a couple of years in San Francisco, and I moved back to the Bay. I'm originally from Sonoma. Then I became an EMT and drove an ambulance around Oakland and Alameda County for 6 months or so, because I really wanted to do something where I could see my work, like visually see my work happening. And then I thought I wanted to become a teacher, like an English teacher. And so I took the CBEST. I got into a program up in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, where my sister was living. And it was around that time that I was feeling, and we'll go right now to, actually, sorry, before I start with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about framing of what you're going to be hearing. I talked a little bit about it, but my path into public media, tips for you, the various newsroom jobs in public media that I've had and that exist, how those jobs are evolving, how public media is evolving, using the Bay as an example, how KQED's newsroom is evolving, and then I'll open up to questions. And just so that you know the world that I'm talking about when I say public media, when you do turn on KQED, you're probably likely hearing mostly NPR content. KQED local content is separate but the same. So in other words, most of the shows that we run and the program that we run is going to be national programs. So Morning Edition, Here and Now, This American Life, Radio Lab, none of that's produced out of KQED. It's all national stuff, but KQED inserts itself into that programming. So we have the local newscast cutaways within Morning Edition. We have the California Report magazine, which airs on Friday. We have Forum, which is our 2 hours worth of live radio programming. We have Perspectives, which is like a 2-minute commentary that we give over to community members. So just know that most of the stuff that I'm talking about is going to be about the local public media stations, which are hundreds of stations around the country that are helping feed NPR, but NPR is helping feed the stations their content as well. Going back to my sad and lonely path. So I was up in Portland after having been an EMT, after wanting to become a teacher, and I was at a low point in my life. This is just my path into public radio. A lot of people were journalists all the way through, with being having worked at their high school paper, or going to J schools or whatever it is. My path looked like this. I was feeling very lonely and wanting to connect with the community. And one way I felt kind of connected to the world was through news, was through people's narrative stories. And I started actually reading the news at this point. And I was probably, what was I? I was like 25 or 26 when I really started getting into the news. And more so, I started getting into people's stories, and audio was a component of that. I was listening to public radio, and the audio was what I loved. I loved the intimacy of it. I loved the storytelling aspect of it. I loved how it wasn't based in the daily news grind as much as it was in reflection of that grind. And that's kind of public media's world that they have made their niche in terms of media, in my opinion. Of course, as I will talk about, we are evolving, but that was what it was, 12 years ago, 11 years ago to me at the time. And so doing that, I kind of started to play around with audio in Oregon, and I volunteered at the community radio station, which had a news department, and I was writing scripts, which I'll explain what kinds of scripts later, which are applicable to public media as well. But I was able to kind of just be around the radio station, learn from people who I saw doing the work, and then just playing around on my own with audio. And this is the first tip that I'll give you right now. If you are interested in audio specifically, there are ways to do it cheap or free that you can start experimenting with right now. And that is like, for example, using a phone to record interviews. You could, of course, pay any number of dollars for professional equipment, but this can also get you started. And then there's free editing software as well that you can use. So again, like GarageBand's an example of that if you have a Mac. So you could record on your phone, email yourself the recording, put it up into GarageBand, and then play around with it. And that's essentially what I was doing at the time. And I, in Oregon, applied to Masters of Arts in Journalism program and internships in Chicago, because I kind of wanted to leave my situation with my sister, and I wanted to experience a new city. And I was also addicted to This American Life, which was out of BEZ at the time. And I knew Chicago public media was seen as like a leader in media. And so I thought like, hey, I would just go for it. I had like some savings, and I said, I'm just going to use what I have and just try to show up, because at the time, I didn't think I got into the journalism program. And I was just kind of going to go show up and knock on the door of the radio station. So here's one of the final recordings before I left.
So, Megan.
Yes.
Are you going to miss me when I leave?
I'm going to miss you so much, Devin.
What are you going to miss about me most?
Well, I'm going to miss our times together, going out, having fun.
Do you think I'm going to like Chicago?
I think you're going to love Chicago.
More than Portland?
It depends.
Depends on what?
On if you have good luck right away, yeah, you're not even going to remember Portland. You're going to wish you never knew the name Portland.
Do you think I'll miss Portland?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Why am I going to miss it?
Because you had such a good thing going on. $300 rent, and you left it all.
True. Best of luck to you.
Thank you. I don't think I'll need it though.
Yeah, I don't think you need it.
So I should add, I'm going to be playing some just personal audio, as well as some audio that I made as a professional. I think both say something about the type of passion that I have for audio. And I want you to think, if you do want to get into audio, like you're going to be wanting to produce clips for your news organization, but I would also encourage you to think about what you love hearing as a person and bring that to your work as much as possible. So in Chicago, I was able to start volunteering at Vocalo, which was kind of a community radio station that's in BEZ, where they were training like volunteers to produce music beds for their radio programs, and kind of taught me the production element of what I now do as a professional, as a public media journalist. So what was really cool is that I was kind of getting a free education and also experimenting, like I was saying before, with audio. At the same time, I got into Columbia College Chicago, where I did get my Master's of Arts in Journalism, which I do want to address at some point, the need for a degree like that, which I think is being phased out in my opinion. But I do want to say during this 2 years, half my education was just hanging around the radio station and trying stuff out and kind of taking my recorder and walking around the streets. And the other half was this more formal thing that I knew I was going to need in order to get into a place like NPR, which was the only place at the time that was really doing creative audio work. Podcasts in the ways that they exist now was not a thing. So I knew if I was going to have to do this, I was going to have to prove that I could be a journalist, because I had absolutely no clips at the time. So part of me was like, just get that degree. And the other part of me was like, in order to do this cool stuff that I really wanted to do. And so I had an experimental phase in Chicago where I was, and again, this is something that you can do right now, just trying to think about like, what audio stories do I want to tell? And one of the series that I kind of came up with was just going around and interviewing street musicians and trying to connect what they do to their identity, and trying to just pull sound out of that, and then just trying to play around, make mistakes, make beautiful things, make things that you know would never be accepted by any publication, but that are for you. So I just want to play one thing that came out of my experimental phase here.
Jackson Street Tunnel transfer between the red and blue line L. Ravenna Bay. Drums.
You will have no stress. You have found the secret to the fountain of youth. My name is Ravenna Bay. And in India, Ravenna was a prince. And they called him Ravana. Now, in India, Ravana was a demon king. So I said, hey, Mom, why you name me that? I just come to the Jackson Tunnel. This is my home. If you want to see me or hear me play, you have to come to the Jackson Tunnel. Music, when I play music, I don't even stutter. For some reason, although I've been stuttering my whole life, right now, I'm not stuttering that much, and that's great. But when I play the drums,
We went on to say more, but I also bring this up because I had no clips, and because I was trying to get into audio, and the journalism program that I was in, and this might be true for you too, was mostly about print. And so I had to do a little bit of convincing to my professors to allow me to do some of my stories in audio. And even then, like, they didn't have experience editing audio. So I was kind of just walking through the process. But I think, and this is where I'm heading to next, I got my first job because of the stuff that I showed, regardless of if it was professional level or where the clips were actually going. Like, I was able to show what I had worked on in that time. So if you're not able to get the chance to do professional level clip building during your early career, you can still put out like who you are, and that's going to be valuable. And I'll talk about this later when I talk about what we look for in terms of like on cover letters and who we're looking for, is going to be, in my opinion, just as valuable in certain situations. This is actually a version of my website I used to own called The World Random, which I didn't want to name it my name because I wanted it to seem at the time like I was a bigger organization. So for me, this was me trying to put out to the world like, hey, I'm making this cool stuff. I'm bigger than one person. At the same time, when I need to use this as my portfolio, it's there. But you can see, like, obviously, I was evolving myself in terms of what I thought was attractive to employers and what I was basically doing and thinking I wanted to put out there in terms of what I could provide an employer: documentaries, creative stories about radio and beer, which I won't even go into, but basically you're all probably thinking about how do you get your work out there, even if you don't have a lot of clips. And there are free website services or free places to put your clips if you have audio, for example, which I would encourage you trying to think about, like where you as an identity might live beyond, the resume that you're going to send in. And yeah, just maybe think about that, because I think it's helpful to have a landing place for people to go to search for that kind of stuff. So I went to the journalism program, was there for 2 years. I made some pretty cool stuff. And then I'm like, what do I do now? I have this degree. I have like a couple clips. I did a couple internships. I actually interned at BEZ in Chicago with an international call-in program, an international like 30-minute program that was on the radio. Then I also did an internship with the California Report magazine at KQED, which was cool. So I got lucky there. But then at the end of it, I applied to over 50 public media stations all over the US and some international, to be honest, as well. But it took me 50 applications. I did an interview at a couple other radio stations in smaller markets, but the winner was Louisville Public Media in Kentucky, place I knew nothing about, probably wouldn't even be able to point it out on map if I, at the time. But the point here is that if you have the means, you have the resources and are willing to try to live other places, then I think you're at a huge advantage in terms of your job search, because that just opens up your possibilities. And a lot of the smaller markets need new people coming in because there's a lot of turnover. So I think that was the case with Louisville Public Media, but I also think that it helped that I had that website where they thought I was able to do the technical aspects of radio, even if it wasn't the types of stories that I'd actually be telling. They at least knew I had the technical aspects, which in public radio is really big. You have the technical stuff that you have to learn. Even if you're a print reporter, who we have been bringing on more print reporters into public radio, you still have to learn it. And then the other aspect, of course, is like you as a journalist. How good are you as a reporter and producer, stuff like that. This is actually a picture of not Louisville Public Media, just a building in Louisville that I always loved when I walked past it. I never knew what was inside, but Louisville Public Media is actually a really beautiful building downtown. So the first job that I had in public media is likely the first job that you might have if you're looking for entry-level work, and that's being a general assignment reporter. And I'm sure most of you know what that is, but essentially in public media, that means that you are, pitching and producing or reporting anywhere from 1 to 3 news spots a day for the newscast. And I'll talk about what those news spots look like in just a second. And you're also chipping away and writing features. And depending on your shop, depending on the station size, for example, in Louisville, you could write like a feature a week, maybe a feature every other week, maybe a feature a month. At a place like KQED, there's no minimum, and we have a lot of reporters. So if you're doing one every 2 weeks, you're probably producing enough. That may change, and we could talk about that later. But that's kind of the gist of what a general assignment reporter will be doing. You'll be doing a short story every day, at least one, and then you'll also be chipping away at features. So let's talk about some of the scripts that a general assignment reporter does in public media. These are essentially what KQED calls them. They're slightly different depending on the station that you work at, but they're all very similar in context within the public media world, all the way up to NPR. So a reader is a script that a host will read. So I might, watch a board meeting and write something up that's 150 words, super short, and then hand it to the host, and then the host will read it. A cut-and script is a script that the newscaster will read, but it has a piece of audio that you've collected, either in person with your mic, or in times of during the pandemic, you can stream a board meeting online and just take out like a 8 to 10 second soundbite or something like that. A voicer is a script that you will write. The newscaster will read the lead and then toss to the reporter. Today, the governor announced a new mask mandate. As Devin Katayama reports, it's a big change from where we were a month ago. And then I'll essentially just voice the whole story. And again, these are super short, and I'll show you what they look like in just a second. Spot is a slightly longer version. It's like the newscaster will read the lead, like a sentence, and then toss to the reporter. And I'll voice the story, and it'll include at least one soundbite. Super spot is a minute 30. So it might include 2 sound bites, maybe some ambient sound, which we call, meaning like sound of the scene if they're at a protest, which the example I'll show you in a second was, then you might add some sound like that. And then the feature, which is really what reporters and public media stations, for the most part, I would say really want to do. And I think there's this interesting tension in every newsroom I've ever been in terms of how much do we, quote, feed the beast, the daily stuff, versus how much time do we have to report on the deeper features stuff that every reporter really wants to do. And features for NPR can be anywhere, mostly they're 3 to 4 minutes. And so I said NPR, I'm even doing it. But for like public media, they're like 3 to 4 minutes. KQED, we let reporters go up to 7 if it's really good, but still kind of short. Of course, you can do documentaries, and I'll talk about one that I did at KQ or in Louisville. But there are other formats that your work can take. But for the most part, if you're general assignment, and most of our beat reporters even live in this world. So this is what a spot looks like. This is a story that was done just a little while ago. I just copied and pasted it and put it into a doc and did a screenshot. As you can see, the lead is slightly longer than normal. It's 2 sentences instead of 1 that the host will read. And you can see Sarah Hosseini started with some ambient noise because this was a protest, a car caravan on MLK Day. And so you see how she wrote in the ambi up top, "What's up, Oakland?" I'm sure there's somebody on the loudspeaker, there's honking. And so the engineer who's actually mixing this will know to bring in that sound. And then she voices her piece. So Kat Brooks, who was there, is kind of leading this protest. Kat Brooks makes a comment. And so she put that in her script. And then it's really just like 1.5 or 2 sentences, or I should say 2 sentences, and then she's out. So we're talking about short scripts, but something like this, if you're actually at the scene, could take you half a day. I know some spots could take you an hour. Some voicers can take you 10 minutes. So it really depends on how well you know the story, what other context you think you need to add, and how fast you can write it. These types of scripts are not meant to be deep dives that collect every single opinion. They're meant to be, this news happened today, it's significant because of this. Here's maybe 1 bit of context and we're out. There's other space in our programming for the deeper stuff. So when you listen to NPR and KQED and you hear the top of the hour, which is 8 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock, all the tops of the hours and often the bottoms of the hours, meaning 7:30, 8:30, you'll hear these newscasts, and that's what we're talking about here. If you do have questions, I'm noticing some comments in the chat. Let me know. I know some of this language gets really confusing. I try to break it down as easy as possible, but I do get caught up in my own language sometimes. So I'll just monitor that as we go. So that's a spot. A feature written up the same way, it's just longer. So in Louisville, I actually became the education beat reporter because education is something, as you can tell, I wanted to be a teacher. It's something that I feel like is really important. And so I just kind of naturally took it up. And you'll do this too if you become a general assignment reporter. You'll naturally be drawn to certain types of themes and beats and issues that are going on in the world. And I would say own them. Like stuff that you're passionate about, run with it. Be the person who we always go to talk about, education or the latest COVID requirements. We have somebody at KQED who is on the digital social media engagement team who just picked that up, and all of a sudden she's this amazing, one-of-a-kind person in the Bay Area who knows like every single question and every single change to the policy that's happening. So now she's like one of our star COVID reporters. But as an education reporter, I was also trying to do very creative work. I mean, that was my passion. That's the thing that I was rolling with. So not only was I doing education, but I was trying to do the more creative stuff, which is something you can do in public media. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But what I like about it is there's all kinds of opportunities for how we tell stories in public media. And so I kind of ran with that. And I want to just share something that's an example of, what public media can add beyond just like the daily grind news stuff that we do. So this was an episode of a series I did called Unique, which I spoke to people within the public school system who were either in different programs that I think just needed to be highlighted, or people experiencing unique situations that I thought needed to be highlighted for whatever reason. So this is a 17-year-old mom, Hannah Watkins, who was in this program, especially for mothers in the school district. And I spent some time with her at her home.
Hi, I'm Hannah Watkins. I am a senior. I go to South Park Tap. I am 17 years old, and I have a little girl who will be 2 in October, and her name is Abigail. You know, everybody's really nice there, and, you know, caring. It's basically a family, you know, so everybody's really close. My dad passed away in April, and we couldn't really afford a funeral. Like, we had a funeral, but we were having trouble with the, you know, expenses. And when my school found out about it, because I was gone for a week, my yearbook teacher and one of the girls on yearbook staff with me went around school getting donations, and we got about $700 in donations in 1 week for my funeral from everybody in school. Like 100 girls that didn't even know me donated. One girl who's in my classes with me, you know, like I talked to her, she donated $30 out of her wallet that day. Like, literally, this is her playroom, so it's a mess. Hooray! Your turn. Ready? It's such a great daycare. All the ladies there are so sweet and kind, and they're so caring, you know, because you're scared, you know, when you go there, you gotta drop your kid off and let, like, a stranger, you know, watch your kid for you all day long. And Abigail, I've gotten her to say please and thank you really good, and that started at the beginning of the summer, but they were teaching them that at school too, and she kept going, like, rubbing her chest and saying please, and like, you know, in a circular motion, and I thought that meant she wanted, like, food, like, oh, I'm hungry, you know, I want something to eat, and I found out that that's sign language for please, so the daycare teaches them sign language, and they're, like, picking up on that. If I didn't have the help and support that I have, you know, with everybody who's been, you know, by my side, you know, Zach and my mom and everybody, I'm sure it would be a lot more difficult. And I know there's people out there who have it a little harder than me, but for the most part, you know, it's, you know, I've done pretty good.
Where's Abby?
What I like about that story is it's what we call non-narrated, meaning, like, we took me out of it, and it's a little bit harder to do because you have to have your source or your guest talk in full sentences and have them repeat stuff, and you're kind of directing them a little bit more. But that's, like, something cool that you can do in public meeting. You heard me do that with the drummer too in when I was experimenting in Chicago. Just cool ways to think about storytelling. As you can tell, like, that is a passion of mine. And so while in Louisville, I reported, I anchored, I hosted live specials, I moderated panels. And this is, I think, in a way unique to public media because we're expected in some ways to be more available to the public. I mean, that's kind of our mission. And so we get to do a lot of these opportunities. And at smaller stations, this is another reason to go to a smaller station. They actually need people to kind of step up, or if you want to step up, the amount of people who can say no to you are a lot fewer. So if you want to do something, like, I really wanted to learn how to host, and they needed backup hosts. Like, I was an easy person to train. I wanted to moderate panels and be out there, and, like, they're like, sure, you want to, like, help set it up, and so you can kind of create these things within public media because, you know, we need more of that. We need more audience engagement. We need more specials. We need more content always. So that's there for you at smaller stations, usually, if you want it. So I was able to produce a documentary, for example, with some community grant funding. I want to be mindful of time, but I just want to play for you like a couple minutes of that.
It's Sunday, and we're in a large congregation at the First Avenue Baptist Church in West Louisville's Parkland neighborhood. A young man is invited to speak.
Good morning. My name is Kenneth Gray, as he said.
4 years ago, Kenneth Gray graduated from the West End School, which is across the street from the church. There are a handful of programs for low-income African-American kids in Louisville, but people say this is one of the few exceptional ones. Founder Robert Blair and his wife Debbie have relentlessly showed the kids, all boys, how to be men of character. That's what Kenneth tells the church.
Thanks to what he put us through, what he put me through, I'm proud to say that I've been accepted to 5 colleges.
Kenneth will graduate later this spring, but he says this may not have been the case, that it could have gone the other way. A school would say this makes Kenneth an at-risk student, but he doesn't care for that term. He calls himself a maybe kid.
All of us were maybe kids, and Like, the idea of maybe is maybe you'll go to class, maybe you'll graduate, maybe you won't drop out, maybe you won't go to prison, like maybe you won't be a statistic and all of that. That's what the maybe idea was.
What's the difference between somebody who maybe succeeds than one that doesn't?
The difference between a kid who maybe will succeed and one who doesn't succeed is who's backing him, who's backing that student. Let's say a maybe kid that doesn't have anyone backing him, he's no longer a maybe kid, he's just a kid on the streets.
There are thousands of students like Kenneth in Jefferson County who are labeled at risk. Sometimes it's because they're homeless, living in poverty, or have mental health problems, or it's a combination of factors. But labeling students doesn't tell the full story. Over the next hour, we'll meet at-risk kids and look at the schools, the courts, and the larger systems in place that are responsible for helping the most vulnerable youth in the city. If we can't help at-risk youth now, their cost to our communities through the justice system, social welfare programs, and quality of life could be worse later. I'm Devin Katayama, and this is At Risk from WFPL News.
That was a documentary I was able to do. I should have mentioned at the beginning, it was about this term that at risk that I kept hearing and these labels that people kept putting on kids. And my thing was like, let's go find the families and the people who are talking about in this way. And so I was in Louisville for 4 years, got to do all these cool opportunities, which actually I think made me a good candidate for KQED, but I always wondered, why did KQED hire me? Because my strongest skill wasn't a journalist, in my opinion. It wasn't that I was a great reporter. I was probably average, but there must have been people who were better than me in journalism. But I think what they saw was some of the stuff that I was doing on my own, my passion projects. I certainly made the connection to what was then my website very apparent in my application. This is the kind of storytelling I want to do. And I know that since I've been hired, KQED has moved more in that direction, more podcasting, more creative storytelling. And so I'd like to think, I've never confirmed this, that is a big reason why they hired me, which kind of goes to what I want to talk about, which is what KQED is doing now, and a little bit about the opportunities I've had and what they say about the newsroom. So I was hired as an East Bay desk reporter. I anchored the news. This was on Halloween. This picture was on Halloween. I didn't wear this all the time, obviously, but it was because I had the skills of being a news anchor and because I was a reporter. I think that also helped me out. And then I hosted American Suburb and the Bay. And these two experiences changed the way I approach journalism. And I think they are examples of one way that the industry is changing. So I want to talk about both of them briefly. I'm actually not going to play, just because I know we're kind of pushing up against time and I do want to leave some time for questions. I'm not going to play this clip, but American Suburb was the first time I worked with another person, a team, where I felt like I was really collaborating. Earlier, I think maybe before we got started, we talked about collaboration. And that is something that I found makes my work so much better. You know, if you're a beat reporter at KQED, you might only be working with your editor, and you might only be checking in with them once a week for a particular story and not really bouncing around too many ideas. The American Suburb and the Bay kind of changed that model, and we really did work as a team. So one thing that really pushed me to be a better reporter is the idea of who we were centering in our stories and how we were talking about these big themes that KQED talks about, that the Bay Area talks about, like gentrification. And so American Suburb was flipping that on its head a little bit. Most of our coverage at KQED is coming from the city centers. It's coming from San Francisco, it's coming from Oakland, but Bay Area is more than 100 different cities, 9 counties. It's a giant area, and we're often leaving out people, places, and stories that really say something about how we're changing and whether our policies are good or bad. And so what we did was, when we were reporting about gentrification in Oakland, which was like every single day, we would hear people saying, you know, I have friends or family who moved out here, moved out to Antioch, moved out to the suburbs. And so we actually went out to Antioch and spent almost a whole year, not like every single day, but throughout that whole year, finding stories about what it meant to either have been forced out or made the choice to move out to Antioch. And what we found when we started centering people in that way were stories about racism, were stories about the struggle to belong and a lack of help that wasn't getting any media attention. Because like I said, most of it was about what's happening in San Francisco and Oakland, which is important, but we're also missing a big piece of the story. So having a team to bounce that off of was really important, and actually played a lot into my work on the Bay. So these are the two different Bay teams I worked on. The first team is Vinny Tong and Erica Aguilar on the right. The final team that I was on was Alan Montecillo and Erica Cruz Guevara on the left. Love these teams with all my heart. And I want to talk a little bit about how we make the show, which I encourage you to think about in your own reporting and ways to maybe roll this into your newsrooms, should you eventually kind of be in a newsroom, or maybe you are currently in a newsroom, because this process can be applied to, I think, any story. And in some ways, I feel like it should be. So this is really the steps about making a narrative newsy podcast, but it's really about how we approach stories and the questions that we ask ourselves. So one of the first, so the top three of these on this list are really what I want to focus on, because I think they drive a lot of what the audience sees in terms of what the identity of the show was. So picking a story is clearly one of the biggest decisions we make as a reporter, as a news organization. It can be the difference between choosing to cover a beat and not. It can be the difference between choosing to cover it from the superintendent and the school policies point of view and covering the politics of education, or it could be covering the families in education. We're making all these decisions all the time, and it's necessary that you have a clear vision about what is a Bay story, what is a DVC story. So hopefully you're starting to have those conversations or just thinking about them in some way. The next obviously is picking a guest to pre-interview. This seems like a simple thing. Talk to the person who knows the most about it. But that's not necessarily what we wanted to do, because what we'll discover in just a second is that people who often get the most space in a particular story are usually at the most advantaged point. In other words, like often that's a city official or it's somebody in power. And we wanted to change that a little bit. And we thought about who else could we interview for this story? Somebody who has not had the microphone before. Can we think about this not from, there was a police shooting, what did the police say? But there was a police shooting, what do the families say? So there's several of our episodes where we spent a lot of time talking about who the guest should be, who are the sources that you are reaching out to for your stories. And this is something that I challenge you to think about as you're asked to cover local news, and you go to that board meeting, and you talk to the council president, you talk to the advocate who's been leading an advocacy group for 20 years, and you talk to somebody on staff with the city, and you kind of leave there and you're like, I got my three sources, great. I would challenge you to think on the next level of that. Like, are those the people who really speak for your story, or is there something deeper in your story where maybe you don't need to talk to any of those people, or at least not have them on record, but use them for context? And is there somebody else you could focus on? What about somebody in the audience who spoke and said something really amazing, but that wasn't necessarily the focus from the policy point of view? So challenging ourselves on who the guest is really tough, because we're moving so quickly and needing to make these decisions quickly. But if we were talking about them as a team, it felt easier to come to a conclusion that was less on the urgency point of view and more on the contextual, what does this guest bring point of view. And then the next one is writing questions and what's the narrative. I mean, this is kind of self-explanatory, but finding a beginning, middle, and end to a story is kind of a skill, because if there's a policy that's being voted on by the full board this week, they discussed it in subcommittee last week, maybe your story starts last week. Or maybe there's a lot of historical context and your story actually starts 10 years ago when this was first brought to the attention of the board, but they just put it aside for 10 years and now it's being brought up. What's that historical context in? And maybe that's your starting point. So crafting a narrative, you can really start a story in any number of places. So thinking about what you need in order to tell the story that you want to tell, and really taking a step back and thinking about the context that you want to add and what you want people to know, and what you want people to take away and where you're going to end up can help you get to that starting point and what you want in the middle and obviously the end. All right, let's see here. Picking a story, it's this is what your story is really about. I put all these words into a word cloud. I started actually tagging our episodes based on what they were about, and I did my best to kind of try to tag them appropriately. And so, you know, while we talk about homeless and housing, I was looking for cross-sectional stories and ways that things were kind of overlapping with each other, because picking a story, you're not just picking a headline and you're picking a what happened in the city council meeting today, but you're really talking about, but what does that mean? Who are you centering and what does it say? For us, it was, what does this say about the Bay Area? That's actually a really simple question you can ask yourself that all of a sudden makes you take a step back and think about other people or other communities or how it's going to be viewed besides just the folks who are on the inside. All of a sudden you're like, whoa, what does this story that's happening in Concord, that's really about like Concord city politics, what does it say about the rest of the Bay Area? Does it say that, you know, we're not paying attention to this really important thing that's actually they're leading the way in Concord? Pull back and give us that context. I want to hear that. Does it say that, you know, the Bay Area is super behind on this particular policy, and like we call ourselves a liberal Bay Area, but really like look at this one example, how we're not putting our money where our mouths are? Those are the kinds of stories I actually really loved. That's why I mention it. So you really picking the story is really about picking your angle, if you will, but also like picking the meaning of what you want to take away. I'm not going to play this clip because I do want to get through this. Pre-interviewing the guest, who should it be? This is Alicia Sadler. Her brother was shot and killed by Vallejo police. We did a whole series that came out, I guess, a year or two after her brother was shot and killed by Vallejo police. But up until that point, largely the narrative about what happened was controlled and told through the lens of police. And so Erica Cruz Guevara did a whole series one summer on the families who were saying, yeah, but that's not what happened. And basically giving voice to the families with the context of, you know, what the police said, but in the right context, not just reporting what they said, but analyzing what they said, and then doing the appropriate reporting and communication in her story about what that meant. We also, on the Bay, started thinking about, you know, are people's personal or professional experience a place of authority? That goes back to maybe the city council president isn't always the ideal guest for you. Maybe it's a person like a family member who you can add the context of what the city council said into your lead, maybe even into the body of whatever you're creating, but maybe the person who you really want to focus on is Alicia or somebody else, personal professional experience as authority. Journalists are actually included in this too. If you as a journalist, and this kind of gets into where journalism is evolving, if you are witnessing something firsthand, like the fires over the last several years are perfect examples. Like we actually often ask journalists to tell us what they experienced, the trauma they experienced. You hear this on NPR all the time. And we don't really relay that into other aspects other than like breaking news. But I think we can really start doing that a lot more because, for example, journalists have been covering a beat for, let's say, 10 years. They have personal professional experience and they can be a person of authority in the story, not the city council member. They're the one who actually has the more truthful take. And so we'll ask them, and you could tell early on, journalists were a little bit hesitant to put the I in the story. But in this case, what they're bringing is actually really useful and more transparent to the audience. And so in a lot of Bay episodes, we tried to pull that out of reporters, and we were willing to go as far as the reporter felt comfortable going, and we'd have a conversation about it and all that. So it's not true for every case that it's going to work or that it's even appropriate, but I want you to think about that as well. It's just like a topic of conversation or things that you're experiencing when you're out there in the field. This goes back to the beginning, middle, and end. I won't spend time on that. So what is KQED News? We are a lot of stuff. We now talk about our audiences and not our audience, which I think is a great idea because our podcast audience and our digital audience looks a lot different than our radio programming audience, but we're all these things. Podcast, digital news, audience, and community engagement, live events, that's all newer stuff that's sticking around, and stuff that if you're interested in learning more about, definitely check out our opportunities, which I'll get into in just a sec in terms of our internships. But just know, like, When I was on the podcast team, I was also expected to do live events. So live events are more part of being a journalist in some ways. If you're asked to and you're good at it, you will be on panels and you will be doing Q&As, you'll be doing, trivia night, even like Bay Curious does trivia night. And in some cases, that type of community interaction, you can roll in news, you can roll in engagement that I think is really important in this day and age, not only to building an audience and having financial support, but actually like connecting what you're doing as a media organization to the public. So we're a lot of stuff. I want to talk about a few things really quickly that we're doing. One is KQED's Editorial North Star. I'm actually not going to read it to you. It's kind of long, but essentially we have an internal editorial North Star, which I can share with you later. And maybe your professors can share this out. That is trying to answer this question of what is a KQED story and the value that we believe needs to be applied to our stories coming from an equity lens and thinking about who's had most of the power in the media for the longest time and ways to think about that or flip that or things that we should be thinking about when we make our editorial decisions. So we came up with that, and that was relatively easy. I think this would actually be a cool experiment to do, I think, as like a news organization or with students. Maybe you've already done this, but like thinking about what would you want to put in your mission statement? What do you think each of your stories should try to do? And then another thing that I would encourage you to do this right now. You can do this individually as a journalist, or your newsroom can do this, and you could bring it up. A source audit. KQED is starting to ask everybody some questions, and actually that's the next slide, so I'm going to save that. We're also redesigning our pitch process, how we pitch our stories, and we want it to be in line with our editorial North Star. So we're actually, instead of just any reporter can pitch anything off their beat because they know their story best, we're actually running it through a lens of, yes, they know it best, but also we want to make sure there is an equity lens in there. There is an equity piece. So we're redesigning our process so that we're having people be able to pitch cool stuff, and then it's being approved by a decision-making body that's in line with our mission as a newsroom. And of course, podcast, live events, community engagement, which I mentioned. So this is an example of questions on our source audit. This is an anonymous thing. We ask every single source who we have in our pieces these voluntary questions about their identity that we want to track, because we want to see if we're doing a good job, because we've already done this on some level, and we've learned that we give a lot more space to white men in more powerful positions. That goes back to almost everything that I've tried to discuss regarding what I've learned over the last several years and what I'm trying to change myself. But you could also design a Google survey that has some of these. What do you want to know about who you are putting in your stories? We want to know pronouns. We want to know your age. We want to know your race and ethnicity. We want to know what position you hold, whether you're an advocate, a journalist, a politician, maybe just a family member, whatever it is. We have another marker for that. We have geographic diversity. We have, where's your story out of? Is it out of Alameda County? Is it out of Sonoma? Class would be an amazing one. I don't think class is on here, but I think that would be a great one to add. Maybe it might be hard for people to answer, but maybe not. But I think that's actually a really important one. I think we've discussed it. I'm not sure why it's not on ours, but that's a great one. So basically at the end of this, yes, intersectionality does matter. At the end of this, hopefully we have a good idea, both on an individual reporter level of who you're putting in your stories, but also an organizational level. And I think this is a great first step for any organization, just to see like who they're putting in their stories. And this is something y'all could do right now. Here's our newsroom internships currently. I was saying before the call started that some of these may be changing next semester. There's 6 months. So January to June, and then I think they start from July or August to December. Newscasts forum are 1 hour, 2 hours, a daily show, call-in show. California Report Magazine, which is 30 minutes on Friday, which is a feature type of show. They're trying to do more documentary stuff. That's the one I internshipped with. Right Nowish, which is our podcast hosted by Pendarvis Harshaw, which is production-based, but also community-based and cool storytelling. Podcast engagement team, if you're into like audience engagement, we have a specific internship currently for that. Visual journalism, audience engagement, and Bay Curious, which is our podcast that asks the public to vote on a question in which we send to a reporter to answer, which is really cool. So what should you put in your cover letter? Showcase who you are as a person as much as possible and tell us your lens and philosophy on news. We get a lot of resumes that basically say, hey, I grew up listening to KQED. I'm a big fan. I would love to be a part of that. Here's, my clips. And essentially like that's kind of where it ends on that surface level, like here's my stuff and I love KQED. I would say, tell me about what you think about the news. How do you approach it? How do you approach intersectionality in a story? That would be amazing if I could hear that in a cover letter. Think a little bit deeper and try to give us a sense for how you're thinking about your work and about media in general. Tell us what you think about the Bay Area and media within the Bay Area. Turn the lens on media itself and tell us we're doing a shitty job, or ways that you see that we need to improve, areas we're not covering that we need to cover more. Spell check. So some of these actually came when I did a survey with a bunch of reporters and editors within the newsroom. A lot of people said like spell check. So definitely spell check and be specific to the job that you're applying for. All right, cool. 1:26, about 20 more minutes for questions. By the way, here's my email address, my Twitter handle, and in my on my Twitter profile, I pinned a tweet to public office hours that I hold every Friday from 3 to 4. They're booked like at this point, maybe a couple months or weeks in advance. So if you want to book some time, they open up every week for 60 days ahead. So try to like just check to see if those are available, but you can find it in my pinned tweet. But I'm more than willing to answer any questions that you have. I'll actually stop sharing now.
Great, Devin. That's great. I want everybody give Devin a nice little round. That was excellent. Thank you very much. Really thorough, really personal and professional, and opportunities and a lot of context. I'm sure there'll be questions. Why don't people raise their? I see Mickey joined us. Thanks to have Mickey, our chair of the department, chiming in with some notes on the chat there. You all want to raise your hand if you want to, and we can do it easily like that. Some questions. I mean, I have a few I can throw out, but love it if others, hop in at will. Or maybe while you're thinking of one, I have one question. Yeah, please, Andrea, jump.
It's not so much of a question. I just wanted to say great presentation, Devin. Really enjoyed it. Very informative, very thorough. And then I really liked the audio clips that really had the narrative or the non-narrative. Those were really well done. Fascinating. You could really hear the emotion in her voice and the situation she was in, and it's just I was floored. I really enjoyed that. That was something else.
Cool. Thanks.
Other folks, I was curious, Devin, if you just want to tell people in case they're wondering. I know I was wondering when I went to journalism school, the difference of writing as a reporting journalist, like what I became, versus writing for radio, writing for broadcast. It uses so many of the same tricks and techniques and skills, and yet they're different, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can really, you don't have to spell check when you write your scripts. You can write to your voice. I mean, that's one of the harder things, but essentially like you're describing short sentences. I mean, a great thing to do is actually to record your voice and then just play it back and see how many short sentences you actually say. And like, to some degree, I would underline also Devinisms, things that like are unique to the way I talk, and then try to add those into your scripts. But for the most part, you're describing in chronological order because it's hard to kind of mess around with timelines for the listener. And you're trying to paint the picture. Like those are the two best things you could possibly do. Three best things: short sentences, chronological, painting a picture. So often we do what we call signposts, which is explaining almost exactly what you're about to hear so that people have context for the sound that we're going to jump into or the scene. And so a signpost might look like something like, the meeting was very contentious or something like that. Or if it's more, you need more context, essentially like resetting the scene that we're going to jump into. Like a lot of times it's really easy to forget or to be like, oh, I mentioned that word. Like people remember that we're in this meeting that was contentious, that I mentioned a minute ago. But leading into the sound that we're about to hear, let's say we haven't heard from that meeting for about a minute, you're going to want to signpost and be like, this contentious meeting had like 20 people, or just giving a little bit more little nuggets of information as you go, but not everything in one big swoop. I think that would be the best thing I could say at this moment, because it really does take like probably a good 1 hour, 1 full day workshop of audio writing, I would say, to really understand some of the other elements to it. So maybe that's something we could do later. Come back at a different time and talk about audio writing.
Sounds good. Great. Charlene, what do you have there?
Yeah, so speak to radio voice. Do you have to have a radio voice, and what is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're really moving away from a quote unquote radio voice. There's a big conversation in NPR and public media right now about how we've tried to train people to sound not like themselves. And if I'm being honest, like the white hosts who we've traditionally had. So this is something I've thought a lot about, because more people have wanted voice training. And I'm like, the old techniques of voice training, which is, sitting up, breathing from the diaphragm, like all that is good stuff. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is how to sound like yourself. And that's like something that took me, I still hear myself. And I'm like, oh, I could have done that slightly differently. Or if I were to say that to a friend, that's something I would never say to a friend. So I think some of it's in your writing, which is why I was like, just talk to a friend for 5 minutes and just both of you jot down the words that you think are unique to that person, or the cadence that's unique to you, and just be very aware as you're listening back to your recordings and writing for the ear, like what are the elements of you that you want to keep in there. As far as like a voice and talking perfectly like this, that's something that's really hard to untrain. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is just sounding confident and then not overselling it. You don't have to be somebody who you're not, and you definitely don't have to sound like NPR-y, whatever that means to you, because it's going to mean something different to everybody. So yeah, Mickey, like definitely speaking to the mic. I mean, there's a whole thing to say about like the production and ways to do all that stuff too, which is another good session to have.
Right on. Actually, before Andrea, Mickey's voice, though, is quite recognizable from Project Censored and elsewhere, which is why when people run into him on the street now, they say, I've heard that voice.
Hey, that's cool.
For better or worse, we're over at KPFA and on 50 stations around Pacifica Radio. So
nice.
Yeah. So hence my commentary too about community media, local issues. I mean, we do a national show. But the reason I brought that up on intersectional issues is sometimes KQED and NPR more specifically, I often wonder the class element of the audience and how much are they pitching to that part of the audience as their donor base versus how much are they actually listening to people in communities where they may not be listening to KQED, right? So that's why I brought up that issue of class and the intersectional issue, because as you know, and I think that's one of the challenges I think KQED has is, and I think they've been doing a pretty good job of it the last couple of years, but really reaching out to the different audiences, as you said. I really like the way that you framed that as the different audiences, plural, right?
Yeah. It's definitely a big conversation in KQED, and it's also very hard to change. I mean, honestly, like we need more people in more places.
Yeah.
I love the fact that there's remote work now, and I wish part of that would stay, and I wish we got out to more places, because you almost can't. It's hard. I mean, we've learned how to report remotely on other places around the Bay Area, but you kind of need to like know a place and live in a place, and that's what we don't do. Like before the pandemic, we had to come into the office, and like it centers a specific audience. It centers San Francisco. It centers Oakland to some degree, even though I would argue we need more representation in Oakland too. But like, yeah, it's definitely something we're talking about, and definitely something that's really hard.
That's where class, I think, is a pretty big issue, because KQED and their Tony offices in San Francisco, very different world than the world of Clayton, for example.
Totally, right? Yes.
So, but that's, I think, where community radio really comes in, and that's where I think that some of the other Pacifica stations actually are more fixated and focused on that. but the trade-off, as you know, is huge because community radio often really suffers from a lack of financial support. And so it's kind of a catch-22. I'd like to see more crossover between some of the smaller community stations and then the bigger NPR outlets, because I think it would bolster both audiences, but that might be a pipe dream given capitalism.
No, I hear you on that. I mean, I got my start at KQUE.
Yeah, totally. We're on KQUE. We're on KQUE. We do fundraisers for those stations all the time.
Nice.
They're really important, so that's great. You got your start there.
Andrea, you have your hand up there, and also Christine. Yes, Christine. After that.
Hi. So Devin, when you started writing the scripts for kind of the shortest news bites, did you ever struggle with what exactly to put in them because there's so little time, little space?
Yeah,
a lot to say that you got to condense down, because wordiness is something that I've kind of been working on. I've gotten better at, but I can imagine that making the sound bites and making it fast but also informative is probably a challenge at times.
It is a huge challenge, and I'm noticing that with this group of interns who it's my first like full semester with them or cohort with them, and I'm working with them a lot more closely, and that's something that the newscast interns are having a real big challenge with is condensing, and really like I tried to actually do it because it's like, let's just say like 6 sentences. So if you were to just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1's being the lead, 2 is what happens next. Maybe it's like they'll vote on it next Monday. Soundbite is number 3. So now you're talking about like 2 spots for context, for action maybe. And so like maybe one way to do that is just write out, I don't know if it's 6, maybe it's like 7, but write it out and try to like save those spots for those things and see like if you can do it, because that is a huge challenge. We ask for like short stories, like we ask like 4 hours of your time watching a 4-hour board meeting, and it comes out as like 30 seconds. It's like, whoa.
To me, that's incredible. It's incredible that you guys are even able to do that, because you got to make sure you catch the essence of what is really happening there, not shortchange it, but also, not include anything that's not immediately important. So, yeah.
And that's actually something that I want to revisit at some point. Like, I think there is a way to change the angle and or context, so that, because when you shorten stuff, it's going to give the power over to the people who are the loudest. That's going to be people in power generally. So I wonder, like, I'm trying to think about ways to experiment with that a little bit. And maybe it's like you lead with the person who's affected, and then you bring in the board member or whatever lower down. I still haven't figured out a way to do it, but I think there is a way to do it. I just need to mess around a little bit with it. And then I need to actually make that a thing at the newsroom.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Christine?
Hey, I was a bit curious, like, how did you find people to interview for your projects? And like, how did you generally connect with other people? So some of the pieces you kind of showed us were like, what's it like to be a maybe kid? And I feel like that takes a lot of trust to develop. And I was a bit curious, like, how did you go about establishing those relationships?
I think it helped because I was a beat reporter in education when I got that opportunity, for example, the documentary. But I think in any condition, like even if it was my first time reporting on education, it took a while. Like I got 4 months to not be in the newsroom at all. I got to work from home, like, which was unheard of at the time. And like, really those opportunities are few and far between in public media. So I got really lucky, but that meant that I could just show up at people's houses. Like for somebody who's in that documentary, I got permission to walk in their door. Not that I ever did it, but like, they're like, come by anytime you want. And so my trust for that family, for example, was built in just showing up, sometimes not recording at all, spending time with them. With Kenneth, how did that work? I found the people who were in charge of the program. They invited me to their ceremony at the church. So I showed up on a Sunday with the recorder, letting them know like I would love to record the ceremony and then talk to anybody who wants to talk to me. Kenneth was actually a kind of a lucky get. And honestly, like his idea about a maybe instead of at risk matched exactly with how I wanted to reframe the whole label. And so that was kind of an organic, like, happenstance and a nice thing to have gotten. But if he said anything else, I still wanted to feature somebody who had gone through a program and felt uplifted from his community. At the end of the day, like he was going to go in that spot anyways. So for him, it was just a one-time interview. I let him know how it was being used. It was probably, in the middle of, if not early in the middle of my 4-month time creating the documentary. But for the most part, like building that trust, sometimes it depends on relying on having conversations before you even start recording or going on record. In fact, I'm working with an intern right now who's trying to earn trust with mothers who are formerly incarcerated. And I'm like, just let them know exactly what you're doing, that you might not put them in the story. Like you're just collecting information and collecting stories, and she needs to know it in order to have the context. And what you're doing then is you're kind of like seeing if they're the person who you want to put in the story, but you're also not overselling what you're going to use their story for, and just being very transparent with them up front as much as possible and along the way is how you earn that trust. And then you can go back to them and ask for a recording. And sometimes they may say no, but often because you've earned that trust and they know how their story is being used, they'll likely say yes in my experience.
Anyone else with any questions for Devin in the last moments you got for him? Devin, when are the next round of, I remember I distributed to students end of last semester, your internship opportunities. So I guess people are in the positions. Next hiring would be for July, like you said. So maybe around April, or when would students expect?
Yeah, I think we're going to try to put them out earlier so we have more time to actually review them, because that's one of the feedback we got this time around. So I think they're going out in April. I'll try to connect back with you when they go up, because I definitely want to keep this relationship going, and just at least letting you know that we're doing the internships. So yeah, I'll let you know for sure, but probably April.
Yeah, great. The Bay Area media scene needs to just, it feels like if something comes out of this pandemic, something positive for media, I would hope that it would be some form of rejuvenation after this sort of a leveling of, the newspapers, of the Oakland Tribune, of the, it's
yeah.
all you walk by the, print media, certainly. I hope radio is doing it on its side, because print is clearly needs a revitalization. You walk by all the boxes in every city, and it's pretty sad to see 8 different empty kind of carcasses that were supplying, printed news matter for years. So yeah, we really, this is why we're here studying it at school, to get back out in the field. Anyone with final questions or comments? You got some chat compliments in there. People seem to very much appreciate it, and they will be writing news briefs about this event. Yeah, Mickey.
Andrea, is your hand up?
Oh yeah, just something real quick. It's just a comment. Yes, as I told Michael before, I'm from a small town from Northern California called Willits. Found out about a week ago that their Willits News, that has been around forever, folded, and is now just going to be a weekly insert in the next town over's bigger paper. So as Michael said, that was a shock to me, because it's been around forever, and that's gone now too. So as far as print media goes, I am all for furthering it.
Yeah, local news deserts are a real challenge, and increasingly places like radio those are also, while they fill the gaps, they're also on the decline because of conglomeration. Bigger outlets buy more things, they put automated programming, and you really lose a lot of the important flair of local journalism. And I'll toot our own horn here for a minute, Devin. The DVC Inquirer actually has been covering, and Andrea in particular and others have been covering local journalism stories, and they're scooping the East Bay papers. They're covering things that these papers either won't cover, or when they cover them, they're very biased.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're really doing our part. I know Michael's doing a lot. So too is Charlene and Donna and the faculty with the students. They're really doing a lot to try to get the Inquirer out into the community to kind of fill some of those voids and those gaps. So I just wanted to thank you so much for what you're doing. And more importantly, I think even than what you're doing as a journalist, is coming out to us and sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your experience, and most importantly too, I'd say your passion. It's great to share that with our group here and our students, that journalism really matters. And seeing people like you do it and get really excited about it, I think is fantastic, man. So thanks for what you're doing.
Cool. Thank you all very much. I really had a good time making that presentation. Well, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Devin, very much. Yep, we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Going up.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Great presentation. Very good.
Yes. Nice to meet you, and I'm looking forward to applying for an internship.
Yeah.
All right. Later on.